Welcome to Black Girls Can Talk, the podcast where we dive into real, unfiltered conversations about what it means to be a Black woman in today's world. I'm your host, Dr. Dejanelle McCree, founder of Black Girls Can Talk. And here, we're creating a space where we can unpack everything from culture and beauty trends to mental health and the joys and challenges of Black womanhood. Whether you're here for the tea or looking for deep discussions, you're in the right place. So grab your seat at the table and let's get into it. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Black Girls Can Talk podcast, where we uplift and empower Black women's voices and stories. Today, we're actually going to be getting into chapter 1 of the book, Black Girls Can Talk. So if you don't have the book yet, make sure you go and purchase it. It can be found on Amazon as well as our website, blackgirlscantalk.com. So I'm just going to open up with our opening quote in the book. So chapter 1 is actually identity. So the quote reads, "I'm very proud to be Black, but Black is not all I am. That's my cultural, historical background, my genetic makeup, but it's not all of who I am, nor is it the basis from which I answer every question." And that quote was said by Denzel Washington. So I love that quote because it just lets me know and others that, you know, we are Black. And whether you're Black, whether you're white, whatever you identify as, that is a part of your identity and not the entirety of it. And so I want to just open up the floor with talking about the basics. Who are you? Who are you? No, really. Who are you? Have you ever sat and thought about that? Who are you beyond what society tells you? So outside of conforming to the ways of this world, the ways of social media, the ways of all the things that we've come to know and learn over time, who are you? When all of that gets stripped away, when you're just in your room or your home alone, when you're away from others, who are you really? For those who are Black, being Black isn't all of your identity, as I mentioned before. Those who are a woman, even if you're a man, that's not all that makes up who you are, or even where you're from. If you know me by now, you know that I am from Detroit, and I love being from Detroit. Being from Detroit has really shaped me into who I am today, and I take it with me everywhere that I go. In my office right now, I have a Detroit, Michigan placard up, sure do, because I love my city so much, and it is the place that shaped me and made me. But I am not just someone from Detroit, right? I am so much more than that, but it does matter. And it does make sense to include that as a part of my story because it is a part of me, right? So too often the world tries to define us before we get a chance to define ourselves. But here's the truth. Identity is personal. It's yours to claim, shape, and redefine as you grow. So who you identify as today may not be who you identify as tomorrow or in the future. Matter of fact, I hope it's not who you still identify as, because as we grow, as we learn, we should be evolving, right? So what gets put in our makeup, how we show up, looks a little different, right? We could still be that same person at the core, but maybe we're more wise. Maybe we have a little bit more knowledge. Maybe have a little bit more experience, right? So it doesn't change who you are, but things can be added to your identity. So going back to how you identify, right? So what are some of the things that you say when you introduce yourself? How do you talk about yourself? So starting with how you talk about yourself will a lot of times be the basis for how someone else talks about you, right? So for instance, if I say, let's just say I'm a podcaster, right? People are probably going to introduce me to other people and say, oh, she's a podcaster, but they left off that I have a PhD. They left off that I'm a professor. They left off that I'm a researcher, right? So you want to make sure that however you identify, you're always saying that to other people, that you are including all of the parts in your identity when you're introducing yourself. So a lot of the times when I introduce myself, I say, I am a researcher and professor. And I say researcher first. Let's also I reiterate this all the time. Not everyone who teaches does research, and research is my give back to communities, to people who may not know the information otherwise. So research is a big part of who I am. It is the basis behind why my brain works the way that it does, how I think. A lot of the qualities of a researcher were in me before I decided to take that on, right? But a lot of people that know me, it makes sense that I'm a researcher because, again, just how in depth I go with things and again, how my brain works. I'm a professor. I have always been an educator, even in informal capacities. For those of you who may not know, my background academically is in health education and promotion. I have a concentration in behavioral health. So I term myself as a behavioral scientist. So a lot of the times when people are talking to me, I know exactly who they are before they say 5 words, their first 5 words, because I've studied their behaviors before they approached me. And people I've never met, I can tell them, you really don't want to tell people who they are, right? But I just take a mental note of it, right? So because I've been trained, right, through my academic career as well as post-academically, I've been trained to be able to identify certain things. Aside from being a researcher and professor, I always add in from Detroit because, again, it matters largely because those of you who know anything about Detroit and know anything about the hardships that a lot of us face, my go-getter mentality, my get it out of the mud mentality, that all stems from being raised in a place where I had to do all of those things. And I came out of that space being successful, right? So I was able to get it out the mud. I was able to overcome these obstacles and become who I am today. So because it made me and plays such a detrimental role in why I am how I am, I always add that in my introduction, even when I'm speaking professionally in academic spaces, at scientific conferences, all of those things. I always talk about who I am and where I'm from. I also talk about why I do what I do, right? A lot of people always ask me, well, why did you don't identify as queer. Why did you begin to focus on the queer community? For instance, I deal with or research populations living with HIV, and I don't identify as someone who has HIV. I, in fact, do not, right? So why pay attention to or focus on those populations? And for me, it's because I understand the battle with identity, right? And what I mean by that is that it becomes hard to tell people who you are without judgment, right? When we think about the LGBTQ plus community and how far all these individuals have come, just there's a lot of, and I'm in my researcher brain, I'm seeing articles come across my brain about how a lot of people don't disclose their identity because they're afraid of how someone will react, how they will be treated. And I work in healthcare inequities, right? So what type of service they will receive because of them disclosing their identity. And same with individuals living with HIV. A lot of the times they don't want to disclose their identity as someone living with HIV because of those same stigmas, that same discrimination. And for me, understanding all the nuances associated with identity made me have an even deeper passion for helping people understand that it's okay to be exactly who you are and to show up that way, to not only identify in a certain way, but to let others know what makes up your identity, who you are, and just simply that it's okay to be you, right? A lot of the times we don't get to just be ourselves. And I've said before that I'm grateful to be in a space where I get to show up as me and I get to be genuine and authentic, and people feel that, right? So you always want to make sure that you're showing up authentically. And part of that is beginning with knowing exactly who you are. So I have a little activity for you. I want you to take some time to write down 3 words that you feel identify you. Words that make you proud. Who are you proud to be? Write down those 3 things and share them with others. I guarantee you that once you start affirming yourself and talking yourself up in a certain way, others will as well. I think the topic of identity is so big for me because very recently I experienced an identity crisis. And this is after I had a PhD, after I was in a world surrounded by people that not only looked like me, but had the same qualifications as I did. I still went through the process of being unsure of myself, being unsure of my qualifications, although I went through so much school. Anybody who's been in school as long as I have knows that we go through a lot to obtain a doctorate, right? So I wasn't unsure of myself in my program and while I was going through it, but in the professional world, I began to shrink a little bit. And so there had to be a space and time, not even a space, there was a time where I realized this shrinking that I was doing, and I decided to change the game. So I did some introspective thinking, like, no, let me go back to who I am, how I was raised, the things that I learned growing up, the things that I learned in school, just kind of, again, affirming myself and instilling certain things back into myself, pouring back into myself. So I had to think through my identity, and I started choosing how I wanted to be identified by others. And that started by identifying those things for myself. So a lot of us struggle with identity crises, imposter syndrome, right? That was a very big thing for me, as I mentioned. Even my little sister talks about in chapter 1. So again, get the book and read it. Talks about in chapter 1 the identity crisis that she went through in her high school studies, right? It has no name or age or race. A lot of us go through the same thing and experience these things. And so it's more common than you think. But it's important to begin with self-acceptance, right? So once you start to accept yourself, others will, hopefully. And if they don't, give them reasons why. Right? Give them a reason to accept you. Give them a reason to understand exactly why you're great, and know that you do belong, right? You didn't enter that door. You didn't get that job. You didn't walk into that space because you didn't belong. You belong before the door was ever opened, which is how the door got opened, right? So God opens doors that no man can shut. So make sure that you are remembering that in every space you walk into and holding your head up high. I want to talk a little bit about privileges and disadvantages for a second. You with me? All right. So we cannot change history, right? We cannot go back and undo the things that were done to our ancestors. Therefore, there are certain things that exist that we had no hand in and have no hand in changing. But you can recognize how those things historically have put you at a disadvantage and turn them into an advantage for you. So I talk a little bit about in the book about how I had several advantages, right? I had several privileges, and one of them being that from an early age, I went to private school. So a lot of people think that, there's a certain stigma, let's just call it what it is, that comes with going to private school, right? And, my private school was set up a little differently. It was set up a little differently. So I went to the private school, but it was still in Detroit. It was on the east side of Detroit. And I was raised on the west side, the best side, where the baddies reside, okay? But my school, so we traveled to school every day on the other side of the city, and you turn the corner and there's the hood. So although I went to a private school, I was still surrounded by things that were at a disadvantage, right? I had certain opportunities because I went to a private school, right? And my father is very, very big on education. I remember being young and being with him in his master's program, like sitting in a conference room eating snacks while he was in class, and I was so bored and so annoyed. But that seed was planted very, very early on for me. So I didn't even think twice about going to college, right? It took some thinking to get to the PhD, I'm not gonna lie. But I didn't think twice about certain things, and I knew that there was opportunity for me, right? But then life happens. So although I got accepted, I applied to 3 universities, I got into all 3, I got accepted. What's next? We have to find the money to go. And because I went to private school and, rode around in fancy cars and wore this or that, a lot of people would automatically think, oh, she's good. She'll be fine. Like, she has the money to go to college. It'll be all good. But again, life happened. And I, in fact, did not have the money going to college. I will never forget. I went, got accepted, had a full ride, went on a college tour, everything, moved in. And within a week of being there, they were just like, oh, you owe such and such balance. And I'm like, I'm sorry, wasn't that already taken care of? And they're like, no, we overturned the decision to provide you with the money that we were giving you. And I'm just like, what do you mean? Like, I'm already moved in. I'm already here. I'm already in classes. Like, what do you mean? And I will never forget having to go through the process of becoming an independent student, which entailed a lot of things. For those who don't know, my mother passed when I was 3 years old. And so they needed proof. I literally had to provide them with her death certificate. It was just so much. It was just so much. But I found a way, thankfully, to get the money to go to school. Although life had been set up in a certain way, we have to always remember that things can change at any moment. So we have to become equipped with certain things, right? Become equipped with the strength that it takes to just overcome different challenges, right? Be equipped with the knowledge of how to get out of certain situations. And so because of those experiences and realizing that my privilege no longer exists, right? I had to figure out how to turn all of those disadvantages into advantages so that I can make it to where I am today. And that got embedded into my identity, because a lot of people that meet me now always say, like, there's something about you, like, when they find out certain stuff about me, they're like, oh, that makes sense. And they didn't know before, but just the way that I show up, you could tell that I've had to go through a few things. You can tell that I have a certain mentality, mindset. There are just certain things about me that I don't really have to tell you about, right? That little snippy attitude, part of that is the Detroit me for sure. Part of that is just, that's how the women are in my family. Also, a part of that is my life's experiences. Like, I tell my students all the time, like, excuses don't exist here. They don't. And because of what I've gone through in life, I actually can't hear them. Like, they go in one ear and go out the other, because I don't live in a world of excuses. I don't make them for myself, and I encourage others not to make them for themselves. And so thinking about identity, wouldn't you want to be identified in a positive light? Wouldn't you want to be the person that someone says, oh, I remember speaking with that person and they poured so much life into me? Or I could tell exactly who that person was just based off of how much they gave, how much they served, how much they were willing to be there for others, right? And some of that is in your makeup from early on, but some of that you learn over time, right? But it all gets included in your identity, because when people think of you, they will think about what you've done, what you said. They'll think about how you act, who you are. And again, we want to make sure that we're remembering to walk into rooms with our head held high like we belong, because we do. And to make sure that when we're leaving spaces, that we leave something good in that room, that we shine our lights bright, and the sunshine stays in the room even after we've gone. I want to read to you all a quote from chapter 1, and it says, walk into rooms with confidence, knowing exactly who you are. Don't let anyone assume or tell you who you are. Make sure they know because you told them. Again, we don't want to allow anyone else to put any false narratives on us, to make any assumptions. We want to be very, very clear about who we are so that other people will know directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right? Other people will know exactly who you are. And hopefully you don't have to show them who you are. So if you take nothing else from this episode, I want you to remember that we are more than what the world expects us to be. We are who we choose to be. So keep speaking up, keep being bold, and keep creating your own narrative. Remember, Black girls can talk, and it's time that we start talking. That's a wrap on today's episode of Black Girls Can Talk. I hope you felt heard, empowered, and inspired by today's conversation. If you love what you heard, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your girls. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at blackgirls_can talk to stay updated on future episodes and join the conversation online. Got something you want us to talk about or want to be a guest on our show? Hit us up on social media or visit our website at blackgirlscantalk.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, Black girls can talk, and we've got a lot to say. Until next time, stay powerful.